So let's go ahead and jump over to the PowerPoint here. And we're just going to go through a few of these slides. So the first thing we need to remember is that the endocrine system has the same basic function as your nervous system. So of course that is to control and regulate the body. It's going to do that using a variety of glands and chemical messengers. So let's quickly go through those glands. You should already know these three up here in the brain that we've covered before. So we've got the pineal gland, the pituitary, and this little area right here is the hypothalamus. Sitting right on top of your trachea here is the thyroid. And sitting in the back of the thyroid, if you were to flip it over, on the posterior side you'd see four little glands that look like dots in the wings of the butterfly. And those are the parathyroid glands. You've got a larger gland that sits on top of the heart and helps you with your immune system. That's the thymus. You've got your left kidney and your right kidney. Sitting on top of that kidney here would be the right adrenal gland or suprarenal gland. And then, of course, over here would be the left adrenal. Underneath your stomach is this large gland here, which is the pancreas. And then we've got ovaries. So you have a left and a right ovary, or a left and a right testis, or testes is plural. If you have two of something, you should be in the habit of making sure that you specify left or right. You're going to need to be able to do that with bones and with pretty much every other organ that you have two of for the rest of the semester. So get in the habit of doing that now. There will be a short practical part to this test where you will have to be able to identify these endocrine structures from models or images. So make sure that you practice identifying them from those models and that you can spell them correctly. Now, what we're going to go through here in this video are comparing a couple of things. First of all, remember we're focusing on endocrine glands. So endocrine glands produce hormones and secrete those directly into the body fluids. They're going to act on target cells by binding to receptors. So this should be a review from back when we learned about different types of tissues. Exocrine glands, on the other hand, if you remember, are going to secrete things other than hormones. So those would be things like oil, sweat, milk, and so on, earwax, for example. And these substances are secreted outside of that structure through some kind of duct. So again, we're just focusing on these glands over here. So there are three tables that I'm going to fill out with you to go over some comparisons of things here. I like to call these my cage matches. So the first cage match we have in the ring is nervous versus endocrine system. So we already said that both of these systems are important for control and regulation. So what types of cells does the nervous system use? Well, it's going to use neurons, right? Whereas the endocrine system is going to use glandular cells. What type of signal or chemical signal is used? Well, in the nervous system, we have really two types of signals, right? We have electricity, and neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitters are my chemicals that are being used. The endocrine system is just using chemicals, and it's going to be using hormones. And those can be either protein-based or non-protein-based, which are lipids. The specificity of the action, your neurotransmitters in the nervous system are going to have to bind to receptors. Oops. They're going to bind to receptors on postsynaptic cells. That should be familiar from learning about synapses with the nervous system. And your endocrine system hormones are going to bind to receptors on target cells. So we always talk about the cells that can receive hormones as being target cells. The speed of onset is, for a nervous system, is less than a second, so very, very quickly. And the endocrine system could be seconds to days. The duration of action is very short. So once you get a response, it's done. And then this can be ongoing for up to days for the endocrine system. So let's just take a quick look and see how we did with that. So we said that we're using neurons as opposed to glandular cells. We're using neurotransmitters, and don't forget about that electricity, as opposed to hormones. With the nervous system, we have to have receptors on the postsynaptic cell. In the endocrine system, we're using target cells. In my nervous system, very, very quick response. Endocrine system could take hours and hours for it to really get a full response. Nervous system is very brief unless we keep stimulating it. And the endocrine system may be brief, but could potentially continue for days. So you should be able to write out a short answer description comparing and contrasting these two systems. Now let's take a look at how different types of hormones signal cells. Now I realize that this slide and the next one are kind of busy, and there's a lot of text and a lot of stuff going on here. So let me just try to boil it down to the basics for you. If I have a steroid-based hormone, remember steroids are lipids, so therefore they are going to be lipid soluble. My phospholipid bilayer is a lipid membrane. So things that can pass through this membrane would be things like steroids. So steroid-based hormones can move right into the cell, which means they are going to bind to receptors in the nucleus, on the mitochondria, or on other structures within the cell. Now I'll come back to that in just a minute. If I'm a protein-based hormone, however, I do not have the ability to cross that membrane because, again, this is a phospholipid layer, so proteins are water-soluble and will not want to go through that membrane. So I'm going to have to bind that hormone to a receptor on the outside of this membrane. That's going to cause this protein to change shape and trigger this chain reaction of events inside my cell that gives me some kind of response. So here's how I think about it. If I'm a protein-based hormone, I'm going to walk up to the door of the cell, the outside of the cell, and I'm going to knock on that cell, and I'm going to say, hey guys, guess what? It's time to make dinner. by the way, I'm going back in the bloodstream, so you take care of things. But if I'm a steroid-based hormone, I'm going to walk right in the house. I'm not even going to bother to stop at the door. I'm going to go right on into the kitchen and say, by the way, I'll be back in the kitchen making dinner. So if we think about that, that means that these steroid-based or lipid-based hormones, because they can cross cell membranes, can affect a wider range of cells within the body. So let's try to take these two things and kind of put them together into a nice summary in a nice little table, because I like to organize things in tables. And we're going to have another cage match. Only in this cage match, in the ring, we have proteins. Oops, did it again. I have proteins here versus steroids. So can my protein-based hormone diffuse across the cell membrane? No, it cannot. How about my steroid? Yes. Do protein-based hormones need to bind to protein receptors? Yes, and this is a very important rule. All hormones have to bind to receptors. So the difference between them is where those receptors will be located. So if I'm a protein-based hormone, where are my receptors located? They're going to have to be on the cell membrane or on the outside of the cell. Whereas steroid-based proteins can be inside the cell. So they might be in the nucleus, they might be on the mitochondria, they might be in the cytoplasm. So which one then did we say would have a broader response in the body? The one that can diffuse into all of the cells. Let's see how we did. So proteins, can they diffuse in? No. Steroids, yes. Do they need to bind to receptors? Yes, always. If I'm a protein and I can't diffuse in, where are my receptors? They're on the outside of the cell membrane. If I'm a steroid, they're inside the cell, on the mitochondria or the DNA or some other structure in the cell. Which one has a broader response? Steroids, because they can go into any cell. Now the last thing that we're going to talk about here is how do we trigger the release of different hormones. So we're going to do that using positive and negative feedback, and we've talked about that some before with homeostasis. So we can get this kind of fluctuating levels, or we can get acceleration of levels, or we can get pulsatile, where we get a big spike. My effects of hormones can be very short or last for days. I'm going to get rid of the excess hormones mostly in urine, but I may break those down using enzymes from the liver so that I stop the effects before I can get rid of them. Now, the feedback up here just talks about maintaining homeostasis, and that's not what I'm talking about for right now, though. What I want to focus on for the next couple minutes is how do we get a particular gland to release its hormones? Well, we can do it one of three ways. We can use hormonal stimuli, humoral stimuli, and neural stimuli. Hormonal stimuli means I'm going to release a hormone due to another hormone. So as you're going through these different hormone lectures, I want you thinking about what's causing the release of that particular hormone. Just to give you a couple of examples of hormones that are released due to hormonal stimuli, you might have T3 and T4 that are released due to TSH. You might have your sex hormones released due to LH. You might have your corticoids released due to ACTH. Humoral stimuli means that I'm going to release a particular hormone due to changes in blood levels of something. So what are some things that might cause a hormone to be released in the, due to changes in the blood? Well, I might release renin due to changes in blood pressure. I might release insulin or glucagon due to blood sugar levels. I might release calcitonin or PTH due to calcium levels. I might release EPO due to oxygen levels, and so on. There's several examples we can come up with here. The last example would be neural stimuli. So this is when I'm going to release a hormone due to direct neural stimulation. So a really good example of that would be oxytocin, which it causes smooth muscle contractions during labor. That is caused by the baby's head hitting the cervix. So that's direct neural stimulation, sending a signal to the brain through a neuron and causing the release of oxytocin. Another good example would be prolactin, which causes you to make milk. The more often a baby latches on to nurse, the more prolactin you release, so you make more milk. When the baby nurses, you also, due to direct neural stimulation, release more oxytocin, which causes that milk to flow. Other examples would be epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are your fight or flight hormones. So those can be stimulated to be released from the adrenals by direct stimulation. And there are other examples you'll find as you're going through the hormones as well. So let's take a quick look here. So hormonal stimuli means I'm releasing it due to another hormone, like your sex hormones, your corticoids, T3 and T4. Humoral stimuli, I'm releasing hormones due to changes in blood levels, so calcitonin, PTH, insulin, glucagon, renin. ADH is released due to changes in blood pressure, EPO, and so on. And then neural stimuli, I'm releasing a hormone due to direct neural stimulation, like prolactin and oxytocin, epinephrine and norepinephrine, and of course melatonin, which makes you sleepy. And you release melatonin due to decreased light levels. So my eyes are perceiving less light, my brain responds by releasing melatonin to make me sleepy. All right, so the rest of the videos will cover all of those individual